Today, we're diving into one of the darkest and most chilling tales in the history of mountaineering, the 1953 K2 expedition disaster. This isn't just a story of ambition and survival. It's a journey into the heart of darkness, where nature's wrath and human spirit collide. So, settle in and prepare yourself for a haunting journey up the world's second highest peak. Viewer discretion is advised. In the early summer of 1953, an international team of climbers, led by the seasoned Dr. Charles Houston, dared to face K2's icy fangs at 8,611 meters. It was the fifth expedition to attempt K2, and the first since the Second World War. Known for its deadly avalanches and treacherous weather, K2 had already claimed its share of lives. But this team was undeterred, driven by a mix of ambition and a touch of madness. Charles Houston and Robert Bates planned the expedition as a lightweight one, incorporating many elements of what would later become known as the Alpine style. Given the technical difficulties, it was impractical to use porters to carry loads high on the mountain, so it was planned to use them only as far as Camp 2. Additionally, the steepness meant there was limited flat space for tents and campsites to accommodate large numbers of climbers. Therefore, the plan was to assemble a small team of 8 climbers and no high-altitude porters. As mentioned, the team was led by Charles Houston and Robert Bates, with the other climbers being Arthur "Art" Gilkey, Pete Schoening, Robert Craig, Dee Molinar, George Bell, and Tony Strether. But something very unsettling that the climbers always need to be careful of is the extremely unpredictable weather that is a trademark of Mount K2. Something that the climbers didn't know would eventually be the cause of a lot of horrors. The climbers reached Base Camp 3, 2 weeks before their ordeal was to start, and up till that point, things seemed to be going pretty smooth, with manageable weather and atmosphere. Now the pressure test was about to start. Base Camp 4, the final base camp, was reached with the climbers having very high hopes and confidence. Most of the climbers stated feeling very fortunate and lucky to have been experiencing such a beautiful opportunity. Yet of course, it was nerve-wracking, looking up at the enormous mountain that stood before them like a scary monster. The tragedies on Nanga Parbat in 1934 and K2 in 1939 had convinced Houston of the importance of keeping all camps well stocked at all times, in case the expedition had to retreat in bad weather. Doing this required the climbers make extra journeys up and down the mountain carrying extra supplies, which would prove crucial to their survival. Their ascent began with high hopes and extremely clear skies, with the perfect weather they could have asked for. But as they were to climb higher, the mountain's true nature would sadly reveal itself. By August 1st, the base was around 7,800 meters, and the next day, the whole team assembled there to prepare for the final push for the summit. Call it foreshadowing, but here is where things started going wrong. Despite the great weather, the first group of climbers left 3 hours late, spending valuable time looking for missing equipment. Now, to make matters worse, it became clear that even if they reach the summit, no teams will be able to climb down before dark. However, the weather had been gradually deteriorating for several days, and soon the weather started to quickly change. At first, it did not disappoint the team, and a secret ballot was held to decide which climbers would make the first summit attempt. However, as the storm continued day after day, their position became more serious. What started as an adventure quickly turned into a fight for survival. Higher up, the air grew thin, and the temperature plummeted. Every step was a struggle, every breath a labor. But miraculously, despite having started late, by 7 p.m. the climbers had reached the summit. A wonderful feat. But as they began their descent is where things started going wrong. The morning after reaching the summit, one of the climbers who managed to climb down in the dark brought chilling news that would end up being horrific. As he was descending, he discovered that due to an unpredictable and sudden weather change, icefall had completely severed the rope, and what was even more terrifying was that the missing ropes would now make the climb down extremely difficult and dangerous for the rest of the climbers who are now stranded close to the summit, with the weather getting worse by the second. As the storm raged on day after day, their situation grew increasingly dire. By the fourth night, one of their tents collapsed under the relentless assault of the wind and snow. Dr. Charles Houston and Robert Bates were forced to squeeze into already cramped tents, sharing the suffocating space with their comrades. The weather forecasts offered no hope, and on August 6th, the team discussed the unthinkable: retreat. The next morning, a brief pause in the storm brought a glimmer of hope. But the real horror struck when team member Arthur Gilkey collapsed, struck by a sudden crippling illness. He emerged from his tent and immediately passed out. Deep vein thrombosis, a death sentence at that altitude. Blood clots filled his leg, something that would be fatal at sea level, let alone 7,800 meters. The team faced an agonizing reality. The odds of saving Gilkey were slim, but leaving him behind was never an option. Since Gilkey was unable to walk, they constructed a stretcher from canvas, ropes, and a sleeping bag, and began the harrowing descent. As they inched down the treacherous slopes, the storm resumed its fury. Avalanches rumbled ominously in the distance, and the team knew they were racing against time and nature. By August 10th, their situation had become desperate. Gilkey's condition was worsening, and the entire team was still trapped in the deadly altitude. Despite the ongoing storm and avalanche risks, they knew they had to move. The descent was a nightmare. Every step was a battle against the elements and their own exhaustion. Determined to save their friend, the team began a perilous descent. The storm's fury grew, turning their descent into a nightmare. Visibility dropped to near zero, and the howling wind masked the sounds of danger lurking just beyond their sight. But before they could reach the top of the ridge, disaster struck. George Bell slipped on a patch of hard ice, dragging Tony Strother and, in a terrifying chain reaction, pulling off Houston, Bates, Gilkey, and Molinar. The climbers plummeted toward the abyss, their screams swallowed by the howling wind. The location of the pair when they fell set off a chain reaction that sent the entire expedition 2 miles below. Only the entire expedition didn't disappear over the edge of the mountain and fall 2 miles through the void. As members one by one were caught up in ropes and pulled from their feet, they tumbled and somersaulted downwards, picking up momentum along the way, until all of a sudden, in a miraculous act of strength and quick thinking, Peter Schoening, who had been belaying Gilkey, managed to hold all 6 climbers with what became known as the belay. The entanglement that caused the catastrophic fall down the mountain also worked to save the expedition. Various injuries and lost gear resulted, but the expedition suffered no loss of members. Well, except for one. After this horrific accident, Gilkey was lashed to the slope, while the climbers injured in the fall were assisted to a nearby campsite. They made it to Camp 7, but their relief was short-lived. The ledge still needed to be bigger before tents could be set up, and the party could put the horrific day behind them. Gilkey was secured with 2 ice axes beneath a rock rib while the space was expanded. When camp construction was completed, Strother, Craig, and Bates went to retrieve him. When they returned for Gilkey 10 minutes later, to their shock and disbelief, he had been swept into the abyss, and there lay his lifeless body. His death most certainly was due to an avalanche, but it is not beyond the realm of possibility that Gilkey sacrificed himself to save the others. The answer will never be known. Gilkey, who had been anchored to the ice slope, was gone. His muffled shouts had been heard moments before, but when Bates and Strother went to bring him to the tent, they found only a faint groove in the snow, a silent testament to an avalanche. It took the survivors 5 more storm-filled days to reach the safety of base camp. Gilkey's death was a tragic blow, but it might have been what saved the rest of the team. With his loss, they were free to focus on their own survival, struggling against the relentless storm to descend to safety. Yet, controversy surrounds his death. Some believe they could have saved him, while others see his sacrifice as a grim necessity. Some suggested that, realizing his rescue was endangering the lives of the others, Gilkey might have untied himself from the mountainside. Charles Houston initially believed that Gilkey, sedated with morphine, did not have the physical strength to untie the anchors. However, When recounting the events for a documentary in 2003, he changed his mind and concluded that Gilkey had indeed untethered himself. Other people, such as Robert Bates, remained convinced that an avalanche swept Gilkey away. With supplies dwindling and the storm raging on, the team faced a grim reality. They were trapped in the mountain's icy grip, far from help. Yet, even in the darkest moments, their will to survive burned fiercely. They banded together, drawing on every ounce of strength and courage to keep moving. The descent from Camp 7 to Base Camp was a grueling 5-day ordeal, pushing the exhausted climbers to their limits. George Bell's feet were severely frostbitten, and Charles Houston, suffering from a head injury, was dazed and concussed. Despite their physical and emotional exhaustion, the team pressed on, driven by the will to survive. After days of battling the elements and their own fears, the remaining climbers reached a lower camp, where they managed to send out a desperate call for help. Rescuers arrived, and against all odds, most of the team survived. But Art Gilkey was gone, claimed by the mountain, his body never found, a ghost among the shadows of K2. As they descended, the climbers stumbled upon a broken ice axe and blood-stained rocks, a haunting reminder of the others' tragic fate. But no other trace of a lot of climbers was found. The mountain had claimed them, leaving only echoes of his presence on its icy slopes. At the base camp, the team erected a memorial cairn for Gilkey, holding a service in his honor. The cairn would later become the Gilkey Memorial, a poignant tribute to those who lost their lives on K2. Over the years, it has grown into a resting place for other fallen climbers, as well as a symbol for those whose bodies were never found. In 1993, nearly 4 decades after the ill-fated expedition, an expedition led by British mountaineer Roger Payne discovered clothing and human remains near K2 Base Camp. These remains were positively identified as Art Gilkey, bringing a somber closure to the mystery of his disappearance. Despite the trauma of the 1953 expedition, Charles Houston was determined to conquer K2. He requested permission for another attempt in 1954, only to be thwarted by a large Italian expedition that claimed the mountain that year. Though disappointed, Houston continued to contribute to mountaineering in other ways, eventually focusing on his career in high-altitude medicine. The 1953 K2 expedition disaster remains one of the most haunting tales in mountaineering history. It's a story of immense bravery, heartbreaking loss, and the relentless battle against nature's darkest forces. As we remember those who faced the unforgiving slopes of K2, we can almost feel the cold, lonely expanse, where echoes of their struggle linger in the icy winds. The thin line between triumph and tragedy is etched into the very fabric of these mountains, where lifeless bodies lie hidden beneath the snow, silent witnesses to the indomitable spirit that drives humans to explore the unknown. Thanks for joining us on this chilling journey. If you found this story as haunting as we did, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more tales of survival and mystery. Don't forget to comment below about what else you would like to see. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and keep exploring the shadows.